And it's not to say that nation-state actors don't have that ability. They do. But you don't need to do that when you have bankrolled and have a blackmail operation where your U.S. representatives, both at the federal level and the state level, are still doing the bidding of communist ideology. And so it's no small wonder when you actually look at the vote count, and there's actually a role that's taken for how people vote. It's never in the interest of the American people. And so we talked about how the election system was really orchestrated through legal means. Like, let's go ahead and enter into a contract with the Department of Homeland Security, CIS, and give them carte blanche to monitor all of our election data. What could possibly go wrong, right? Especially if the DHS hates Trump and hates his followers. And so at that point, it's like we have actually codified and legalized fraudulent practices and fraudulent processes. And that's what's made our battle so difficult in reform, is that a bad actor can point to a law that they helped create to put us under their thumb.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us once again on the State of Freedom.
Welcome, everybody, to the State of Freedom. I'm Danielle Walker, joined by my brilliant and excellent and sharp as a tack co-host, Chris Alexander. We are live today on VOP USA Radio and TV network. We're on Rumble, X, YouTube, and Facebook, and we're here every Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Central. Well, joining us today is a great friend of the show and our go-to election guru, Professor David Clements. We are going to be getting into some issues that are at the top of many people's minds, and if they're not at the top of yours, we will be putting them there today. That's the declassification of the Russiagate hoax by DNI Gabbard, what that means for Obama and his merry band of crooks, and an update on Tina Peters. So before we get into all of that, let me read the scripture of the day. It is Ephesians chapter 2, verses 18 through 22. And it might take me a second to find it here. Let's see. 18. It says, "And now, because we are united to Christ, we both have equal and direct access in the realm of the Holy Spirit to come before the Father. So you are not foreigners or guests, but rather you are the children of the city of the holy ones, with all the rights as family members of the household of God. You are rising like perfectly fitted stones of the temple, and your lives are being built up together on the ideal foundation laid by the apostles and prophets. And best of all, you are connected to the head cornerstone of the building, the anointed one, Jesus himself. This entire building is under construction and is continually growing under his supervision until it rises up completed as the holy temple of the Lord himself. This means that God is transforming each one of you into the Holy of Holies, his dwelling place, through the power of the Holy Spirit living in you." And as I was reading that this morning, it just struck me that if we're in Christ, we're being transformed. And that means that we're all a work in progress. So let's live and give grace to one another and operate in love, assuming that our brothers and sisters in Christ are operating with the best intentions. Sometimes we are prone to believe that maybe they're operating with less than the best intentions. This passage is also an encouragement that we must continually submit ourselves to the Lordship of Christ, because it's through that submission that he molds us and he perfects us. He lives inside of us, and God showed me this morning that he is doing a live-in renovation. So if you have ever lived in your home through a major, even minor renovation, you know how messy and inconvenient it is to have your home be a construction zone, especially if there's delays, like people not showing up for the job.
So you mean like you're acting like DOTD?
Let's not make it more difficult on him or on ourselves than it needs to be. Let's show up, obey, and let him get the work done that he's identified that needs to get done.
Yeah, and let him get it done in the way that it's supposed to be done. David Clements, our guest today, I remember when he was on before, reminded us and himself that, how we do things, the spirit in which we do things is just as important as what we do. As St. Paul said, Danielle, it doesn't, you can be the perfect human being. You can do everything correctly on the surface. You can know everything in the world, which is impossible. But if your heart is absent of love, then we've done nothing. It doesn't please the Lord. In fact, it offends him. And so I think at a time when it looks as though we are emerging and really important things are starting to come out that need to come out, now is the time to continue pressing forward in truth, but to resist the urge to be vindictive or trivial or belligerent. And someone who consistently maintains that spirit, as we have observed, is David Clements. And it's always such a pleasure to have you with us, David. How are you?
I'm good. That's high praise, and I just want to emphasize it's when you're able to observe it, because there's lots of times I certainly don't feel that. Yeah, as you were talking, and I'm thinking about all of these huge revelations from DNI, Gabbard, and Trump, and just how fickle patriots are, how fickle MAGA is on the news we receive during a 24-hour window, and how quickly we become accusers. And so I think that was a really great caution. I mean, I struggle with it myself, but I've really tried to show restraint, especially when it comes to Trump, because he just has a knack for just give him enough time and you're going to get the result that you're hoping for. And how you get there's always a mystery. But you'd think after 8-10 years, we would just press pause before we have to give the hot take on whether the guy's compromised this or that. And I'm stealing this from another podcaster, but I thought it was really helpful, especially for people like Trump. It's clear he's got an anointing, right? It's clear he's got God's favor. You can't survive multiple assassination attempts. And he's also just has this experience, this portfolio. And to have all three, you need all three to be able to govern in the world's affairs. And I think there's many people that are probably listening that have God's favor, but they may not have competence.
Yeah.
There's people that have, an anointing, but that favor is a big deal. It can clean up a lot of the rough edges. And so we just have to have trust that God is at work. We kind of analyze and reflect upon the latest developments, whether it's Bondi, the Epstein files, Kash Patel. And it seems like everyone kind of gets their day to be questioned and examined. And I think that's okay. But I maintain that I don't think God has just carried us through 5 years of real hell to get to this place where all of a sudden he's going to leave us alone and be abandoned.
Yeah. That's such
I agree with
a
that.
great point. I agree with that as well. Certainly President Trump has earned the benefit of every doubt. I think that's what we're getting at here is that, and my habit is always to presume in his favor. And if there's anyone who's earned that presumption, it's President Trump. And so I'm with you. I'm in it for the long game. I have complete confidence in President Trump, and particularly, as you alluded to, in light of some of the very recent revelations from Tulsi Gabbard. And I wanted to ask you about something in particular, the Russian collusion hoax. So leading in 2016, leading up to the election, the intelligence community had made a determination that Russia neither had the capacity or the intent to interfere in the presidential election. Then somehow, after President Trump prevailed, that narrative changed, not just changed, but was completely turned on its head, completely reversed. And so now there's evidence that not only was there no Russian collusion and that this narrative was entirely manufactured, but it was directed and orchestrated from the very highest levels of our government. I wanted to give you a chance to talk about that and your thoughts on this.
Well, I think my mind is blown, but it's in some respects it's not, because there's an intuition where we all knew that there was a hoax there. Trump has certainly signaled that to his supporters. But I think the amount of discipline to maintain your resolve in the midst of false accusations and smears by the media for years before you release or declassify something. And you could say that, okay, he couldn't have done that during the Biden regime. You got the stolen election. but why didn't they declassify things during the end of the first term, right? And these are just logical questions. It's like,
Yeah.
why didn't you release it then? And I think it just serves to confirm my hypothesis and many others' hypothesis that 2020 was effectively a sting. I mean, that's the only way you can make sense of this, because you've got zero leaks. It also makes greater sense of why certain people have not been assigned to positions like DNI. Like General Flynn's name is someone that was always brought up. Why wasn't General Flynn placed in a high position within this administration? So people, trolls, could attack them, and proponents say just hold the fort. But as you have this declassification, one of the thoughts that I had is you couldn't have put him at the head of DNI. He's a fact witness. It would look so self-serving to have him as the head of DNI than be the person or the conduit for release.
Great point.
Yet you've got Tulsi, Democrat, disaffected, targeted, but on the No Skies watch list for travel. And so this dream cabinet that Trump has assembled, what you're finding here, you have the right spokespersons to be in front of a camera to kind of inoculate the easy attacks that, this is self-serving. They're going to try as they may to accuse Tulsi of being just a foot soldier for Trump, but she's got, a decade worth of being fairly independent in her takes, standing up against the uniparty. And so those are kind of my initial thoughts. It helps me make greater sense. And then there's just an admiration for the things that have to be going on right now. I mean, I'm still kind of processing, but we know there's been a referral given to the DOJ. Well, who heads up the DOJ? Pam Bondi, who's been attacked like crazy over the Epstein files. Pam Bondi. Well, she can't do this without Kash Patel and Dan Bongino, who have also been attacked. And so it raises a really important question, which is, okay, Epstein's a bad guy. We get that. But he is not an end unto himself. In other words, he serves something greater. If he was this guy that was used to blackmail and coerce and control our political affairs, whether it's through Mossad, whether it's the CIA, he serves something greater. And so while people were so upset about Trump being dismissive, I think Trump's trying to get people to focus on who does Epstein serve?
Yeah.
And if you've got a referral now for Barack Obama, Comey, the architects, that's who Epstein was serving. He was serving, the highest, most powerful people in the world. And so you have this 180 where I've been tracking the Rasmussen polling, and you've got Trump's lowest polling during the 6 months because of what he said about Epstein. And almost immediately, when you get this bombshell declassification from Gabbard, I think people are starting to put two and two together that he's going for something way bigger.
Yeah. It's funny, whenever you're saying that, all I could think of was that famous line from Austin Powers, who does number 2 work for?
Yeah, exactly.
Turns out it might be Obama.
It might be Obama. So he's using so President Trump. It's such an interesting point you make, David, that the overwhelming human tendency when Trump was being attacked so viciously would be to declassify, clear his name. No, here's the truth, and yet he didn't do it. So not only does it look like in retrospect that was the right political calculation, it certainly explodes the myth that Trump is some irrational czar, impulsive, unregulated bundle of emotions that can't be controlled. I mean, that is just unbelievable political self-restraint and moral self-restraint that he exercised in not doing that at that time, and really for the good of the country and for the good of ultimately being able to disclose the real truth and bringing these, as you say, these real monsters down. And I think it's such a powerful observation that you make on that.
There's one other thing that just came to mind while you're talking. This just shows how masterful Trump is. If he would have come in day one, because you know how the news cycle has such short attention spans, had the declassification right out the gate, had all of his people lined up to just start the retribution campaign and not take his time. I mean, he's been moving very fast, but he's had to be very, very calculated. the way that he artfully phrased and kind of provoked people over Epstein, if he would have just declassified things out the gate, he would have been accused of doctoring and basically doing all of this in a self-serving way. And I think there would have been a legitimate skepticism from his detractors, from Democrats. And you think about it, you've got Swalwell demanding release of the Epstein files. You've got Democrats writ large demanding it. You've got late night talk show hosts. Just they know that there had to have been something that was in there that could be used by the deep state, because this is really their last shot to take down Trump. And by messaging, it's very punk rock. Let me lay this out. When you tell people to get over something, they get fixated on what it is that you're telling them to get over. And so he amped up an entire, political party to demand something that I think he had every intent of releasing. And by being so strategic on doing what the left does, which is project, that there was alteration, there were fabrications that were taking place from higher ups, the handlers of people like Epstein. He is just sitting in such a beautiful place from optics. It's like, okay, I didn't want to give you this stuff, but since you're demanding it, here you go. Is there anyone else that's got the moxie and the patience to play the long game? And then there's
That's
one
what
other
it is. Yeah.
shadowy figure that I don't think we've seen the last of. I was kind of scratching my head over Durham. John Durham. What happened to Durham? Because we got one arrest, a couple trials, very few results. But the only way that you can really carry out a vast criminal conspiracy case, and this has to be a vast criminal conspiracy case. The Epoch Times re-released one of these charts of all of the different players, and there's just so many, is you have to have indictments that are under seal. And you talk about patience, and you talk about zero leaks to get to this date, and have Trump now posting funny AI videos of him in the White House with Barack Obama being arrested by the FBI as he's smiling. That's not something you do unless you've got the goods.
Yeah.
Thus far, Trump's been proven right. But yeah, like right now, we're still kind of in the armchair position, trying to ask hopefully the right questions. But as long as there's momentum, I think everyone's going to be so thrilled about the future of this country and finally cleaning up, because we've been clamoring for arrests for 4 years, and it looks like we're there.
The secret to losing weight 2 times faster has gone viral. See the transformations hundreds of thousands of men, women, and teens are experiencing around the world with the Slender Eyes drops. These homeopathic hormone-balancing drops are proven to control appetite, support thyroid function, improve energy, boost mood, and increase metabolic rate. To learn more about the drops or other incredible natural wellness and lifestyle products, email me at danielle@freedomstate.us or visit the Shop Our Partners page at freedomstate.us.
Yeah.
Well, I saw yesterday in the news that the number of federal employees that have been fired from under Trump's tenure has reached 22,000. And I think that has something to do with the no leaks. I mean, not everything, but it has something to do with it. And John Solomon's been kind of at the cutting edge of breaking some of this news, especially around the RICO aspect of this revelation by D&I Gabbard. And one of the main things he's been talking about, I saw him on Bannon saying, was that if in cases of conspiracy, there is no statute of limitations. So have you given any thought to that? And how far back do you think this might reach?
Well, it's not that there isn't a statute of limitations for conspiracy. There is, but as long as you continue to further the conspiracy, it remains an active case. And so to the degree that you still have deep state actors that are still conspiring, even now, to cover up their tracks, to take down Trump, there's a level of furtherance that I think most legal experts would say there's no way that they've told the statute.
Right.
What do you call the past 4 years with a usurper in office and just the 51 intel chiefs all colluding together? So even under very, very stringent analysis of the statute of limitations, I think you're fine under a conspiracy. But then you also have the big one, which is treason. And there's
That's
no
what I was going to
statute of
ask you about,
limitations.
David. And let me ask you about the treason specifically. As you well know, Article 3, Section 3, defines the act of treason as levying war against the United States or adhering to their enemies or giving them aid and comfort. Under the strict definition of constitutional treason, apart from the clear criminality of it, does this rise to the level to fit into constitutional treason?
Well, lawyers are really good at understanding this. It's frustrating to laypersons, but I don't believe that there is a black and white encapsulation of it is written, therefore I'm right. What you have are skilled advocates that argue the law, and you have to have a good faith, articulation of why you think that the law applies. And I say this because if you're to use the definition that you just applied, and you're talking about levying war, and you're talking about, you think of a battlefield, you think of old armor, you think of old steel and not old iron, and do we have spies that are overseas? And you really have to look at the past 8 years with a view for kind of a Cold War mentality. People call it nonlinear warfare, where you're not using bullets, you're using hit pieces in the press. But the fact that you have an undermining of the incoming commander in chief, and who does that favor? So it really comes down to, is there information from a globalist standpoint? Let's just put it that way. That, and I'm trying to be careful here because I'm not entirely sure, but we all know about the United Nations. We all know about, the World Health Organization. We all know about Klaus Schwab. We have our boogeymans. We have all of this globalist kind of stuff out there. And to what degree has Obama, Clinton, and most of our congressional leaders align themselves with foreigners to destabilize and bring the American nation to its knees? And I think if you use that prism, you can check off all of the boxes. But it's not like you're in an active theater of kinetic war. It's the exact opposite. It's like you've invaded our country with tens of millions of illegal aliens. Oh, you've unleashed fentanyl. Oh, you've completely destroyed the purchasing price of the dollar. I mean, there's so many ways that we've been subverted that I can't think of a kinetic war that would have brought about a better result for our enemies than what we've seen over the past 4 years. And so if that's the criteria, yes, I think you've got a good faith argument that treason applies to many, many of the higher ups.
There's more than, in other words, David, there's more than one way to levy war.
Yeah, and much more powerful. It's a much more powerful way. Even the Japanese in some of the writings leading up to World War II, the old idea of every American was armed behind every blade of grass. And so you've got a lot of communist thinkers that have talked about you have to subvert a nation and basically convince them from within to no longer share the identity of being a proud Westerner, a proud American. And to the degree that Yuri Bezmenov articulated how you change the culture in America by demoralization, destabilization, crisis, normalization.
Great point. Just like David, I think it was Lincoln who said that when and if our country dies, it won't be by murder, it'll be by suicide.
Yeah. And so it's like the Chinese figured this out a long time ago. And I'll give you a perfect example that I think fits the context of what we're dealing with. Communist China, through I think the Wanda Group, purchased Legendary Studios. Legendary Studios caters to 18 to 27-year-olds if you look at their films, a lot of the DC films. And I think they spent, $3.5 billion. If you're dealing with old iron, there was a time where if you wanted to exert military supremacy, you'd buy an aircraft carrier. They're not doing that. They're buying movie studios. They're buying the vectors for storytelling. And once you change the stories that we tell one another, what happened during 2000 to 2020? Americans had a lower opinion of our country, of ourselves. You never see movies that are major tentpoles where communists are ever the main villains. It's capitalist. And one of the perfect examples was Iron Man 3. And I'm bringing this up because my son just is watching it. And it's a great film. And the arch nemesis of Iron Man is a Chinese guy by the name of Mandarin. And if you read comic books, like that's the foe. You've got Iron Man, you've got Mandarin. And the subtle way that they must have stripped down the script, because they actually send their scripts to a screening house in communist China, because if it hasn't changed, there's a quota on how many films that are U.S. produced can actually be shown to about 1.3 billion people over there. So that's what separates a film that might make 80 million to being $1 billion.
Wow, I did not know that.
Is having access to China. So every single film that gets approval to be played in China, scripts have to be approved, reviewed, and they call it the Pander Express. So you have to pander to them. And you'll see little things that are adjusted that are so subtle, like The Martian with Matt Damon, where he gets stranded. It's a great movie. It's really fun. But if you really look closely at the storylines, you basically have American astronauts that botch a mission. He's stranded. Americans try to save him, and they botch a second mission. And then you find out that China, through its benevolence and superior technology and thought, actually help assist and save Matt Damon. Go back and watch the movie. There's a movie with Ryan Gosling where I think he plays, I forget the name of the astronaut that lands on the moon. I think it's First Man or First Mission or something like that.
Okay.
I did some research when I was in academia. And, of course, one of the most integral things about the moon landing was the planting of the American flag. So the communists sent a note saying there's not going to be a planting of the American flag on the moon in this movie. And if you watch the film, you will not have the planting of the American flag. So back to Iron Man, because this is really, really subtle. If you recall, they changed the identity of the Mandarin to a character played by Ben Kingsley, where he kind of has a Bin Laden-esque vibe to him, like Middle Eastern, but he's hard to figure out. And then you later find out that he's like a drunk, imbecilic actor that's a facade, and the real Mandarin is a white capitalist played by Guy Pearce.
Wow.
So like when you watch it, the story arcs, it's great, but like you're sitting there going, okay, what are the kind of meta concepts that we're missing here? We have completely taken American comic book property that kids have read for 30, 40 years, where the communist dictator Mandarin has now been replaced by an American capitalist played by Guy Pearce. And It made $1.3 billion, a massive hit. And so those are the little things that will change the perceptions of young Americans. And when you go to the American University, you've got the Confucius Institutes. And under the guise of language training, they're being indoctrinated into CCP talking points. And they're very careful not to use Mao, because they know that Mao is still very, very unpopular. But Confucius, the guy that serves us with the wisdom that are on our fortune cookies, they're so strategic. And through some miracle, Trump, I think, identified the soft power coup that was taking place decades in the making. And I think I shared this with you all the last time I was on the show, but he has reverse engineered Yuri Bezmenov's analysis. It's like, make America great again. What does that statement mean? He's moralizing America. He is counteracting the demoralization efforts, and now it's cooler to be a MAGA Republican than any other political party. And you think about how absurd that would have been like 8 years ago. Like, we remember Republicans and how uncool we were versus the Democrats. They had all the celebrities. Now it doesn't matter. Like, everyone kind of abhors these celebrities. They've let us down. And it's not to say that it's cool to be a Republican, but it's cool to be a MAGA Republican. And so he's figured out how to moralize, to stabilize, to solve crises in record setting. And now he's normalizing that this is what you're going to expect. He's casting a vision for the kind of wealth that's going to come in through tariffs. He's casting a vision across the board in so many powerful ways. And in 6 months, look what he's accomplished.
Yeah, David, that's really interesting. And so Trump has made it cool once again to recognize and oppose this kind of soft totalitarianism that you're talking about, which before Trump was just sort of taken as a given, that's. But the broader point that's worth mentioning is that a lot of Americans who, because we're not being invaded by China. Because we're not being invaded by a hostile force, then everything must be okay. And they need to understand what you're talking about here, that we are talking about this soft coup, this soft totalitarianism. And we have to be very wary of some of the subtle messages that come to us through our media, which is, controlled by a country an ocean away, which is a scary thought. But I think it's a beautiful thing that President Trump has made it okay and even extremely important to recognize and oppose what you're talking about.
Yeah. Look, it really has a bearing on our discussion on elections because, for the longest time, people were being convinced that to the degree that the machines were being manipulated, that it's communist China hacking them from overseas. And it's not to say that nation state actors don't have that ability. They do. But you don't need to do that when you have bankrolled and have a blackmail operation where your U.S. representatives, both at the federal level and the state level, are still doing the bidding of communist ideology. And so it's no small wonder when you actually look at the vote count, when there's actually a role that's taken for how people vote, it's never in the interest of the American people.
Right.
And so, we've talked about how the election system was really orchestrated through legal means. Like, let's go ahead and enter into a contract with the Department of Homeland Security's CIS and give them carte blanche to monitor all of our election data. What could possibly go wrong, right? Especially if the DHS hates Trump and hates his followers. And so at that point, it's like we have actually codified and legalized fraudulent practices and fraudulent processes. And that's what's made our battle so difficult in reform, is that a bad actor can point to a law that they helped create to put us under their thumb. And your last resort is to appeal to like common law things that haven't been in practice for 200 years. It's like we're literally back to this founding kind of way of thinking of what did the founders do when the king was so tyrannical, because they had all of the laws on the books that favored the king and the nobles. And yet the American settler had to just kind of write a new chapter. And in some respects, we're in the same exact position now, except it's different because we're already on the other side of a major victory through the Trump election. And there seems to be a very, very strategic setting of landmines for the enemy that we're seeing detonate right now in real time with declassification efforts. But you also have the court rulings of last year. You had the Jarkissi case where in administrative hearings, you have to have a jury trial. That's huge. Have you ever been in an administrative hearing and felt like you got a fair process? No. And so that complemented the other case, I forget the name, but where the Chevron deference standard was basically done away with. So you've got all of the legal shaping that can really set us on a great path in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And then you've got the decision recently with the injunctions, where all of these liberals that are filing their cases in liberal areas trying to get nationwide injunctions. So that was struck down. It seems like things, when they need to fall Trump's way, they do. And I think the big question right now is, what are we going to do about that executive order that he issued, I think in March, I think it was 25th, which seems to suggest that we're done with the mail-in ballots coming in after Election Day. We're done with non-citizens voting. We're going to make sure that certifications actually mean something when it comes to the machines. You're not going to have a Democrat that can shut down that executive order nationwide anymore, even though there's 19, I think, attorney generals that have filed lawsuits trying to stop it. So to the degree that they stop, it's going to be in 19 little boroughs as opposed to the whole nation. So it's interesting to see the chess match that's going on. And I don't think Trump's done. I'm almost certain he's got another executive order coming down the pipeline to really push the enemy into a corner.
Yeah. There's I'm sorry, Danielle, but let me ask David about this real quick. David, there's in one of President Trump's executive orders, he's mandated what looks like a pretty deep dive into all electronic voting systems in order to determine the extent to which they are subject to attack, to malicious intrusion, the extent to which any component parts are manufactured by any foreign adversary. And I believe that investigation is ongoing. Meanwhile, and that's the Department of Homeland Security in conjunction with the Election Assistance Commission, I believe is what it's called. Meanwhile, right here in Louisiana, we have our Secretary of State who is charging headlong, as fast a pace as she possibly can, to invest $150 million of our money in new computer-based voting equipment. How do you reconcile that effort on her part with President Trump's executive order? It's been our position down here that she cannot and certainly should not be going forward with any investment in this type of voting system until the results of that investigation pursuant to Trump's EO are complete and the results are in. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, if memory serves, Louisiana was trying to adopt the Georgia model. So there'd still be a level of using the QR code and the touch screens, which is a terrible model. And the executive order really did focus in on barcode technology. Like, that's just not going to happen. So to the degree that there was a plan to adopt the Georgia model, they're going to have to go back to the drawing board, just from a plain reading of the executive order. But your question's a little bit different, which is, it seems like you've got higher ups in Louisiana that are representing to public officials in the state legislature that just do your best. We'll just kind of roll with the punches. We've got this money. I think we can concede that there's not a new testing that has been performed by a lab to bring everyone up to speed on what the EAC has declared, which is you got to have compliance with the voluntary voting system guidelines, the VVSGs, and no one
2.0.
is compliant with 2.0, right? And so I would not be surprised if there are bad apples within Trump's circle that are saying, look, we know that there's no way that we're going to be brought to a scenario where we're not going to have elections. So just go and do what you can with what you've got. I don't think that's coming from Trump. I think that's coming from people that cannot conceive of just how serious he is to not letting us run another fraudulent rigged election. So I think it's negligence on their part. I think it's a breach of their fiduciary duties to the constituents in Louisiana to waste and squander money towards systems that are not going to meet the purview of what's in the EO. And so it's going to require some form of litigation. Now, to the degree that they're politically savvy, maybe they're not one of the 19 states that are suing Trump over the executive order. You can bet your bottom dollar they're probably waiting to see the outcomes, and others, and actually hoping that there's going to be a ruling that does not favor Trump's EO, so they can go ahead and get the vending equipment that they want to use. So there's still a lot of games being played, and that's why I'm convinced there's got to be another executive order that really pushes people into a camp one way or the other. There are a bunch of groups that are fashioning and creating executive orders that provide, I think, a legal framework where the president is well within his national security power to get rid of these machines. And there's just so much information out there on supply chains, components, and then the actual evidence that, you know, we've tried to put out there. So many have put out there. And I think you've got a receptive audience now with Tulsi Gabbard and Danielle. I have some information about task force and people that are investigating this. I'm not at liberty to share the identities, but there are task forces throughout Trump's administration that have surprisingly been comprised of really, really good people that are on this. And so I don't know how God's orchestrating how it's all going to come together and get us the desired result, but I've been pleasantly surprised over the past 6 months, the stuff that I'm hearing. And it's one of the reasons why I've been so quiet on social media, is that it's not that I'm not working. I'm actually working as hard as I ever have, but I'm just not able to publish anything that I'm doing. Because the last thing that you want to do is notify scoundrels in Louisiana about our plans so they can go ahead and neutralize them.
Right.
But there are serious cyber experts that Tulsi is working with, and they've got the receipts. And the other thing that we have to kind of keep in mind is, FISA is an incredibly corrupt tool, but I have no problems with that corrupt tool being used to get all of the information that we want. I mean, like, you think in terms of all of the data that's being tracked by our satellite systems, Space Force, what have you, it's all there for the taking.
Yeah.
And to the degree that you've got probable cause that our elections have been tampered with, what's stopping anyone from the Trump administration to submit a probable cause statement and just collect that information? So in other words, patriots that we work with have been we've been confronted with the challenge of only being able to look at public facing documents, open source information, and all of our analysis to get to our conclusions have been derived from just what we can get a hold of. And so there's all of these gaps in our understanding where we have a pretty good hypothesis of how it's being done. What I'm here to say is there's nothing that I can think of legally that would stop the Trump administration from simply getting the information in the gaps and getting that in front of DNI. And so to the degree that I don't have 100% of the answers for all of the confronting us when it comes to elections, I can't conceive of a legal obstacle that would keep Gabbard and Trump from getting the necessary information to shut the whole thing down. And obviously they're not going to telegraph what they know, but
Right.
I think we're going to be confronted with evidence that is so rock solid that when that executive order goes out, watch out. People are going to be scrambling to get their SHIT in gear for the next election. I have
And
tremendous faith.
and what happens, David, if we're in a situation at that point where our Secretary of State has already invested in a 10, 15, 20-year contract to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, and then ultimately President Trump shuts down, or Tulsi Gabbard shuts down electronic voting systems in federal elections? Can you imagine the chaos in Louisiana at that point?
Yeah, and it makes me think of a video that Trump put out on the campaign trail. So this was before he was elected. He would do all those great, like, kind of visionary statements, and he'd have different topics. But one of them, I think, was on the impoundments. Is it the impoundments clause? Basically, up until the 1970s, just because Congress authorized expenditures, that if there was a way to be more efficient and not waste that money, the executive was under no obligation to spend it, especially if you find fraud, waste, and abuse, and you can return it to the coffers. I'm wondering if there is a similar power for your governor, that in the event that you have evidence that shows that, again, what we already know, that these products are defective, that they should be able to void the contracts with defective products that do not serve the purposes of the American people, that you can put a hold on that funding and return it. I'm of the mind that there's a spectrum of how you go about restoring the American Republic. We talked a little bit about treason. I personally think that if you're at the head of these vending companies and you understand and know how the proprietary software works, and you know for a fact you are subverting the will of the American people, a lot of these people should be caught up in the investigation, the conspiracy investigation that involves Obama. Because I can't separate Obama and Hillary and Comey and all the other bad actors from the administration of a fraudulent election.
Right.
So you've got the brain trust, but you also have to have the people that are wielding the weapons and the tools to manipulate the databases, to manipulate the elections, to install corrupt judges. I mean, why is Boasberg getting every single case in front of him? Can someone explain that to me? So, I mean, the conspiracy is huge. So I'm just hoping that whatever net they've cast certainly encapsulates the bad actors at Dominion, ES&S, and all of the integrated softwares, because I do not think that these people are just doing garden variety fraud. I think it's at a much higher level. And when you start seeing, Lord willing, indictments for some of the CEOs of these companies, I mean, this might feel like wishful thinking, but right now I'm very wishful given the declassification efforts over the past 48 hours. I think that those contracts fall apart. I mean, how can they not?
Yeah.
Well,
So
they're vitiated with fraud and corruption.
Yeah. If you're looking to invest in physical precious metals or convert your 401k to a precious metals backed IRA, please consider making your investment with our trusted partner, Metal Stacks. Their prices regularly beat the big sites and they have no credit card fees or minimums. Shipping is free for orders over $500. Just visit metalstacks.com/dwalker or get there from our website, freedomstate.us. If you're interested in the IRA conversion, drop me a message at Danielle at freedomstate.us and I can get you connected with their white glove service.
yeah.
Well, I'd love for us to turn to Tina before too long, because today's a really big day for her. Saw in the Gateway Pundit yesterday that one of Trump's longtime attorneys, along with Tina's legal team, went to Colorado yesterday, I believe, to meet with her and to see what they needed to put forward for a habeas hearing today. Do you have any thoughts on what's going to come out with that? And maybe for our listeners, explain what a habeas hearing is.
Yes. Habeas corpus, produce the body. I don't know if that's going to make any sense to anyone, but what I can tell you is that post judgment, typically, you can raise a series of constitutional challenges, and they've done that. They've done that both through the state appeal itself, and they've availed themselves of federal courts as well. I have not been following Tina's cases as closely as I have ever since I got investigated by the bar for visiting her in person. I kind of was put through an administrative hell for another period of time. So I don't like the fact that I have to admit this, but I've had to be a little bit more judicious on how I interface with Tina's case, because I was at the bar weaponized against me. But to the degree that she's raised many issues, one of them was following federal law and basically giving her some type of whistleblower status and protection. That was something that was raised. The supremacy clause was another thing that was raised over the fact that how can you prosecute her if she is following federal law, and if you've got concurrent jurisdiction over preservation of records. She should have had at least that legal defense provided at trial. It should have found its way in a jury instruction. It actually should have found its way in the grand jury's process before the whole thing kicked off. And I know for a fact there was no legal form that was presented to the grand jury that said, by the way, she did have this legal charge over here to preserve the records. Bond issues and issues over whether or not this is inhumane treatment of someone who is awaiting relief from the Court of Appeals. Because if there was legal error, and there was by Judge Matthew Barrett, what a hell of a penalty to have someone languish in prison for a year.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, this question on that point, David, has she already gone through the full state court process regarding post-conviction release? Has she already sought that relief in federal court and it was denied at the high court in Colorado, just pending her appeal to be released? And so therefore she can go into federal court and not be met with an argument that this is premature because his claim hasn't been exhausted in state court yet?
Well, I know that they've filed all the necessary motions in state court. I don't know if I have a fresh recollection on what she's done in the federal courts. I know that the statement of interest that was filed by the DOJ was something that I was following for a while, and the state attorney general, many of the people that are part of the theft and kind of the operation in Colorado have filed their motions. And so, yeah, I don't really know. I wish I was a little more prepared for that for you all today, but
yeah.
Well,
it's an argument. I just ask because I'm sure that it's an argument that's going to come up, today. The exhaustion argument, anything that they can possibly say to keep her in prison, is something that they're going to put forward.
Yeah. Look, I think we're so cynical, rightly so, about hoping and praying that good people would get out. And if this was as simple as, the president showing the requisite courage and signing off on a pardon, if he could do that, he can't, then she'd be out. And so we're left still with this mind-numbing, frustrating process where you've got a vestige of the old guard still holding positions in the judiciary. Unfortunately, her fate is in the hands of a lot of people that have bought into the real big lie, which is she's a threat to democracy, that she was the one that was meddling with the perception of people in elections, that she's the reason why we don't have confidence in elections. And so to the degree that you've got federal judges that have been appointed by uniparty Republicans and uniparty Democrats, or you've got people that have appeared on state ballots as judges through a retention election or through confidence votes, Tina Peters presents a huge moral dilemma for them. Because in some respects, they need her to go away. They need to bury Tina Peters for them to preserve their power. Because if she's right about what she disclosed in Mesa County, if she's right about the 29,000 election records that were altered or deleted, and if Trump's got the goods in a way that's connecting all of the dots from the D-class stuff, and it finds its ways and its paws into elections in Colorado, many of these judges are in trouble.
Yeah.
So it's like you're kind of looking to see who's going to blink first. Is anyone nervous in the judiciary? I don't know, but I just don't like her chances with the judiciary unless there is a level of exertion. And I don't mean this in an intimidation factor, unless they're starting to figure out, that the law actually applies to us as well. And maybe we live to fight another day and we show mercy. But all that I've seen with respect to Tina Peters is an over-the-top punitive demeanor where she could have been given probation for that trial and she was given 9 years. She could have been released. He could have reconsidered sentencing. The Court of Appeals could have immediately released her saying, look, pending appeal, we're basically going to stay this. They could have done all that.
Yes, and they should have.
Yeah, and we've seen the exact opposite.
So that's something that's been on my mind really, some people have called what Tina uncovered the Rosetta Stone of the 2020 election, but perhaps the D-class is what's going to ultimately lead to Tina getting freed rather than the will of these corrupt judges.
Yeah, look, I don't ever want to present myself as having more information than I do. I mean, I really am a fly on the wall, like you all, just analyzing what I can get my hands on. And I know people are so fed up, and the idea of hopium, just giving false hope to people is something that I can expect because they want to see arrest. They want to see Tina Peters. And every time I put a social media post defending Trump and trying to see through all, get through all the noise, I'm reminded by many of my followers that are so jaded that this is BS. I don't believe it anymore. They've given up. And I haven't. I think we're there. But
And David, all the signs are there. If you just take a step back and look, it looks like this is slowly simmering to a boil. And I believe that it's going to be a boil that results in much, if not all, of what we are all looking for. I really do. I mean, if you really look at it closely, and you explained that so well earlier.
Well, you've got, again, okay, you've got an indication. I think General Flynn put out a post this morning that Gabbard's going to declassify and provide even more information this week. And I know they have to be strategic because if they release excerpts and declassify paragraphs, what happens is the legacy media and all the deep state actors start manufacturing their new narratives to rebut what's being put out there. And so there's got to be a steady release of information week in and week out. But in the midst of all of that, what Trump has demonstrated over the past 2 weeks is that he actually meant what he said. There is going to be accountability. You've got a referral to the DOJ for people at the highest level, including Barack Obama. So at that point, look, take your cynicism and just put it on the shelf. We're talking about people that are peanuts in comparison to Barack Obama, a former president of the United States. And it makes me think about that truth post that Trump put out a couple times, which was the cease and desist to all of the people that were running fraudulent elections. And I've read that many times. I'm sitting there going, he's serious. And if he's going to go for shock and awe with the former administrations and the Clappers of the world and the Brennans of the world, I have to believe that they're building their case for the people that have been brutalized by the tactics of the deep state. And there's really no better example of someone who's really risked it all and kind of been a poster child for weaponization than Tina Peters. And the fact that her name's been brought up, the fact that they do have a statement of interest tells me that, like, look, I've got a long list of election officials and clerks that I think should be prosecuted. I mean, because I've been to 49 states. Tina Peters is at the top of the list, even for the Trump administration, when it comes to making this right. And I just hope and pray that Tina has enough internal resolve to know that when she gets out, she is going to be revered as this kind of generational figure that history is going to, you're not going to be able to separate the plight of Tina Peters from the rigged and stolen election. You're not going to be able to separate her story from the story of Donald Trump. They're intertwined. And few have paid a bigger price than her, because she's a lot like the J6ers, but she's actually suffered the full weight of the corruption of the deep state, in that J6ers in many respects didn't have a social media following to where they kind of had to feel the character assassination in the press and the headlines. They were thrown in a cage, which is terrible. And many of them were thrown in a cage for years. Tina is one of the few people that was assassinated from a reputational standpoint in the press and thrown in a cage. There's not many people that have had to deal with both.
Yeah,
It's a short list. And
that's true.
Yeah. Well, we're praying for her today, praying for good news to come out this afternoon. I know that in the Gateway Pundit article, they posted, I think Joe Hoft posted how we can listen in on the hearing today. So we can post that in the chat. But
Yeah, we will.
yeah.
Let me ask you one last question about Tina, David. Let's assume that she's released under habeas today or in the next couple of days or several days or whatever, and pending her appeal, she's free. And let's say that, the Colorado state court system upholds one or more of her counts on her convictions. Is there any federal relief once all of that is exhausted and there's finality of judgment on the state level? Is there any federal relief that she could seek at that point?
yes, but it's kind of the long shot of all long shots, because to the degree that you've got disparate rulings from a state court and a federal court, as long as there's a constitutional issue that's being zeroed out, there's a pathway to the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court. So the degree that you get a direction from the Supreme Court that has a bearing on weaponization, has a bearing on a violation of the law when it comes to her duty to preserve records, the only court that I know of that could actually tell the state courts, the courts in Colorado, that you've got to vacate the judgment would be the United States Supreme Court, right? And so I've seen enough in the legal theories that have been articulated that there is a way, and what people need to realize is that you have an automatic right of appeal to the intermediate courts, but you don't have an automatic right to the highest court in the land. It's a writ of certiorari. You petition, you're saying pretty please, and they have the ability to say yes or no. And so to the degree that they don't get relief at the intermediate court level, then you're basically playing a waiting game. That is there any way to expedite this and get it in front of the U.S. Supreme Court? If you're like most Americans, that's a Hail Mary. I mean, that's a complete prayer, because there's thousands of cases that are petitioned to the Supreme Court that aren't taken up. And sometimes they take years. I think one of the better avenues is to start having lawsuits filed against the state of Colorado by the DOJ, because what you want to do is create some form of original jurisdiction that gets the controversy directly before the Supreme Court. And so we see that where states sue one another. So if there's something along those lines where the DOJ takes a vested interest to sue the state of Colorado, basically you're in violation of the laws. We see it when it comes to administering elections, and you need an expedited hearing before the Supreme Court, then there's ways to get her out. But yeah, we're kind of in a place of first impression. These are concepts that there's not a lot of case law out there that you can point
Yeah.
to and say, yeah,
Doesn't
this is,
seem to be.
yeah.
One step at a time, one step at a time.
Yeah.
We pray for a good outcome in the short run, for sure. Well, David Clements, it's what a pleasure. Why does it seem like the time always flies by, whatever you're on? I don't quite understand that, but it's always a wealth of knowledge and privilege to have you with us today. And God bless you, sir.
Well, thank you both. I feel a little out of practice. After the pardon, I said, I don't want to do any social media at all. And so I haven't. And so this is an exception because you guys are such lovely people.
Well, we have two exceptions today. You bumped something for our benefit, and you came on. So,
Yeah.
I mean, my gosh, we must be doing something right.
Well, you all are. But I've kind of been in a season of just, I'm tired of hearing myself talk. I've been tired of hearing myself talk for a couple of years now. And after the pardon release, I'm like, if I have a choice to not do social media and just do quiet service behind the scenes, I'm going to try to embrace that season. And so I'm a little out of practice. It's been a while since I've been on a show. My wife and I, we went on a vacation to Hawaii. It was a work vacation. We did some election integrity stuff there. And then we visited J6ers at a retreat they had in Springfield. And that was just a couple weeks ago. So I was coming back from that when sorry, I canceled on you, but I forgot about it. But we've been doing just kind of this quiet, there's just been a quiet service and just trying to interface with people that are healing. And I feel like the Clements family is doing its own form of healing, where it's just, there's been so much noise and so much just advocacy for 4.5 years that you kind of forget who you are, because you're
Yeah,
not keeping the counsel of,
and I think, David, that when we get to the blessed isles of ever after, God willing, I think that we will realize then that the greatest acts of charity and nobility and service were often done where nobody even knew about it in this life.
Yeah.
But
you know
God
what,
sees.
David? Yeah, he does see you. Well, one, you don't sound out of practice, so thank you.
well, my mind is just racing for, I think it's one of those things where I'm processing real time with y'all today.
Yeah.
And I'm still in wonder of kind of the good news that's coming out. Every time we talk about something really, really positive, we get braced with a reality of Tina's.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. What's coming around the corner?
But I'm so encouraged that you're encouraged, because you're like a bellwether out there.
You really are.
Well, I have to admit, sometimes I fake it. No, I am encouraged, but there's been a submission that I've had to go through, because like everyone, we all have our timetable on when we want things done. And I think after November, Trump's victory, I think everyone that sacrificed in this movement, there's thousands and thousands of people that have lost something because of the stand that they took. I think they were holding out hope that as soon as Trump won, they would kind of get their Hollywood ending, where like, I get restoration, I get my reputation back. And to the degree that hasn't happened quick enough, you're seeing people fray and lose faith, because while Trump's in, they don't see their life the way that they want it to be. And so many J6ers are upset. Many people are upset over the Epstein files. And I'd be lying to people if I didn't wrestle myself with I still don't have a sense of what is up next. And so it's just a really frustrating place to be in, a holding pattern, and to be in zero control of what happens.
If we don't know what's up next, David, can you imagine how President Trump's adversaries feel?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And so I've had to make peace with the idea that, okay, I feel like I had a really, really strong vision for what I needed to do on elections in J6, and it ran its course, because at some point you just need the big guns that have far more power, far more resources. And so now I'm just like everyone else. I really don't have a hand in shaping, the stuff that I was doing when you had an adversary like the Biden regime on the other side. So all the stuff that I was doing for 4 years, was really to try to galvanize support in the midst of a tyrannical regime. And I've had to kind of change the way that I calibrate and look at the world because, okay, you've got people that have their destinies have brought them to this point, and be humble enough to just take a look at someone like Pam Bondi, Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, all of these people, and say, okay, now it's your time to really shine and carry out your assignment. And I hate waiting. I'm not good at waiting, but right now I think there's something different in the air. And Daniel, you sent that great encouraging word. And you're not the only person that shared that with me. So many people have just sensed that we're on the cusp of just seeing the deep state implode. And so just have faith.
Yeah, I agree. Have faith because, I think about President Trump, and when you think about the position he's in right now, he is fighting wars on literally every front. So it's in a way, it allows him to flood the zone from time to time when he wants to, when he needs to. But in a way, that has to be a feeling. You have to feel pretty alone at times too, in that
Sure.
position.
Yeah.
So
I've never seen someone, when I talked about the anointing, the favor, and the competence all rolled into one person at that level in my lifetime.
Yeah.
Thank God that he's on the move.
Yeah, a great poem by Rudyard Kipling. I'm sure you've read it, David. If I know you, called one of the lines in there. If you can wait and not grow tired by waiting or being lied about, yet never deal in lies. That's kind of something that's our charge, I think, right now, where we are. That's our charge. And with God's grace, we will be faithful to that charge. So God bless you, sir, and we hope to see you again soon. Enjoy your family.
Thank you both. You guys are doing wonderful, wonderful work. I'm always impressed with just the quality of guests. And I get blurbs. I follow you all on all the different social media channels. So when I'm on YouTube, I'll get little short clips, or on X. And you all are filling a need of just great conversation that's meaningful.
An honor.
Thank you so
sir.
much. The State of Freedom is a listener-supported podcast. We're committed to pursuing the truth about policymaking, decisions, and situations in Louisiana and at the national level that stand to impact our freedoms.
Please become a monthly supporter of the State of Freedom at freedomstate.us as we continue to expand the voice of liberty across Louisiana and beyond.
Thanks for joining us today on the State of Freedom. Be sure and check out the show notes for this episode. You can always go there and find the calls to action and resources mentioned in the show, and you can find out more information about our advertisers there as well. If you want to learn more about us or support our work, visit freedomstate.us. To get involved with Louisiana Citizen Advocacy Group, visit lacag.org. We'll see you next time. God bless.